How do you stay calm when your own wife laughs in court and says she'll take half of everything you worked for, even your grandmother's $15 million estate? How do you answer when the whole courtroom expects you to break, but you already moved in silence months before? This is how I went from the quiet, soft husband to the man who made even the judge laugh at her greed. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Mark Ellis, and people usually see me as the quiet guy in the corner. I manage money for other people. I look at numbers and risk all day. It is not a loud job. It does not make good party stories, but it pays well, and it kept my wife in the life she liked. At home, things always looked fine from the outside. We lived in a tall, narrow townhouse in the city. White walls, big windows, open kitchen, a small balcony with plants Sophie picked. When people visited, they said it looked like a page from a magazine. They said we were a stylish couple. She smiled for them. I made coffee and stayed in the background. Most days started the same way. I woke up before Sophie. I made breakfast. I checked the markets on my tablet. I cleaned the kitchen. When she came down, she scrolled her phone while sipping coffee. Sometimes she said she was tired. Sometimes she talked about a new event she was planning. Often she barely looked at me. At first, I told myself it was just how things go in a long marriage. People get busy. They get used to each other. You stop saying thank you out loud and just live. That is what I believed for a long time. Little things did not feel little anymore, though. I would cook dinner after a full day at work. I liked simple food, roasted chicken, vegetables, nothing fancy. Sophie would come home late, full makeup still on, and look at the plates with a small frown. She might say she had already eaten with some people from the industry. Sometimes she just pushed the food around and said she was watching her weight because of photos. She told me she was grateful, but she said it in a flat voice, like a habit. When she did notice me, it was usually to fix something. She told me that my shirts were safe but boring. She told me my shoes looked like I was already a grandfather. She told me my jokes were dad jokes in the wrong way, not with love, but with a cringe. I laughed along. I thought it was normal teasing. I told myself that couples tease each other. It was different when we were alone versus when we were with her friends. With her friends, she became another person, louder, sharper, hungrier for reaction. I saw that version of her clearly one warm evening on a rooftop restaurant downtown. That night still sits in my mind like a stone. She had said it was just dinner with some people from her event world. She asked me to come because they wanted to meet the financial wizard behind her stable life. That was her phrase. I did not think much about it. I put on a blazer, the one she said looked least old man, and we took a taxi to the restaurant. The rooftop was full of glass and steel and soft music. You could see the city lights, tiny stars on the ground. The tables had candles on them. The crowd was young, beautiful, loud. I felt older than my 48 years as soon as we stepped out of the elevator, but I did not say that. Her friends were already there, a group of women in their 30s and a few men with loud laughs and expensive haircuts. They greeted Sophie with hugs and air kisses. She lit up for them. When she introduced me, most of them smiled politely and turned back to talk to her. We sat at a long table. The menus were all small plates and things I did not recognize. I chose something simple. Sophie did not even look at the price column. She never did. She told her friends that money was Mark's department. She said he liked to feel useful with the bills. They laughed. I smiled and took a sip of water. As the night went on, the drinks kept coming. Sophie drank fast. Her voice got higher. The conversation moved to gossip, then to relationships, then to money. It always ends with money in these groups. Someone mentioned a news story about a rich divorce. They talked about a woman who got half of everything, a huge number, and won. One of the women turned to Sophie and asked how she would handle a divorce if she was ever in that kind of situation. It was meant as a joke. They were all laughing. I waited for Sophie to laugh it off, maybe say she would never think about that. She did not. Instead, she turned her head toward me and looked at me for a second. Then she said, in a light voice, that she had already made it clear to me that if we ever divorced, she would take half. She said she would make sure she got her share of the millions and the old mansion in the country. She did not say, my grandmother's estate. She called it her future mansion. She said it with a kind of pride, as if she had earned it by existing next to me. Her friends laughed loudly. One of the men asked if it was true, if the estate was really worth that much. Sophie answered before I could open my mouth. She said it was worth about 15 million, maybe more, and that I was very, very comfortable. Then she said something that hurt more than the words themselves. She said that at least she had the sense to marry for love and money. I felt my face go warm. I looked down at my plate. I wanted the table to be quiet for just 1 minute. I wanted someone to say it was not okay to talk like that. No one did. They all liked the story too much. A few minutes later, a new voice joined the group. Sophie had invited Drew, her personal trainer, to drop by if he was free. He was free. He walked over to the table with that easy gym confidence, muscles tight under his shirt, and greeted Sophie first. They shared a quick hug that went just a little too long for my taste. She introduced him as the guy who kept her camera ready. Then she pointed at me and told Drew, in front of everyone, that I was the one who paid his invoices. Drew laughed and patted my shoulder like I was a friendly uncle. He said I was a smart man for investing in his wife's looks. Then he said I was lucky to catch a woman like Sophie at my age. People laughed again. It was an easy, nasty kind of laughter, the kind that pushes the target out of the circle without saying it. I smiled and nodded. This is what I have trained myself to do in tense meetings, so I did it here too. Inside, something started to shift, not a burst of anger, more like a slow, cold understanding. I watched how Drew and Sophie talked to each other. They used little private jokes I did not know. They touched each other's arms when they laughed. When she teased him about some workout, he playfully flexed his arm and told her she would never leave him if she saw him in a fight. She answered that with a smile that I did not recognize anymore. It was not for me. The rest of the dinner went like that. They talked over me, they joked about rich men and young women, they used words like secure the bag and retirement plan, and everyone knew they were talking about someone like me. I sat there, quiet, watching the city lights and thinking of my grandmother, Helen, and her sharp eyes. When the bill came, it landed near me without a word. I picked it up. The amount was high, but not shocking. I could pay it. That was not the point. As I pulled out my card, the conversation turned again to divorce settlements. One friend said that if Sophie ever left me, she would be rich for life. Sophie did not deny it. She did not even hesitate. She leaned back in her chair and said that if we divorced, she would make sure she got half of everything I had, including the country estate. She said she would not leave a single stone unturned because she was not stupid. She said this with a laugh, like it was a fun story for the group. I heard a small sound behind me, from the next table. A man's voice, low, speaking to the person with him. He said he felt sorry for the old guy at that table because his wife was going to bleed him dry. He did not know I could hear him. He did not know I understood every word. I signed the bill slowly. My hand did not shake. I have signed bigger numbers in my office many times. But this felt different. As I put my pen down, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and saw a small notification on the screen. It was a calendar reminder I had set days before, when things at home had already started to feel wrong. The reminder had a simple title: Call Victor. I looked at the laughing group around me. I looked at my wife, glowing under the rooftop lights, drunk on attention and the idea of future money that she thought was already hers. I looked at Drew, relaxed and sure of himself, like this was all a game he could not lose. Then I slid the phone back into my pocket, felt the weight of it, and knew that the next day I would make that call. The next morning, after that rooftop dinner, I went to work like always. Habit is strong. You move through it even when your mind is somewhere else. My office sits on the 21st floor of a glass building. When you walk in, it looks like any other investment firm. Gray carpet, soft buzz of voices, screens glowing with charts. People who do not know this world think it is magic. For me, it is just numbers telling a story. I have a small corner office. It is not huge, but it has a window and a door I can close. On the wall are a few framed certificates and one old photo of my grandmother, Helen, standing in front of the estate. She is in a simple dress, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp even in black and white. That morning, I put my briefcase down and sat in my chair. I opened my email, I checked the markets. I answered a message from a nervous client and calmed him down with clear numbers and a simple plan. I did all of it on automatic. The rooftop scene kept replaying in my head. The jokes, the way Sophie talked about my life like it was already split on paper, the way Drew and her friends looked at me with a mix of pity and amusement, like I was too dull to know what was coming. I took my phone out and looked at the reminder again. Call Victor. Victor and I had gone to college together. Back then, I was the quiet math student, and he was the guy who loved debate. He went into law, I went into finance. We stayed in touch on and off. Years later, when my grandmother started to plan her estate, she asked if I knew any good lawyers who understood both trusts and family feelings. I gave her Victor's name. She liked him. She told me he was sharp but not arrogant. She said he listened. After that, she worked with him and some older partners to set up her trusts and other documents. I did not follow every detail. I was busy with my own job. I just knew she felt safe. Now I had that name in my phone again. The reminder glowed on the screen. I slid my thumb over it and hit dismiss. I told myself I would call him later, maybe in a few days when I was calmer. In my head, there was still a part that hoped this was all just ugly talk, not ugly intention. Instead of calling, I turned my chair toward the window. The city moved below me like it always does. Cars, people, small bright billboards. I remembered another call in that office years before, when things felt very different. Back then, Helen was still alive, and I was only a few years into my job. I was working late, staring at a spreadsheet, when my desk phone rang. It was her. She said she hoped I was not still at the office, but of course she knew I was. She asked how I was. I told her I was fine, busy, building something stable. She liked that word, stable. Then she asked how things were with Sophie. At that time, Sophie and I were still dating. We had just moved in together. I told Helen that Sophie was fun and bright, and that she understood the demands of my work. Helen listened. Then she said she was happy for me, but she also said she was calling for another reason. She said she had started to work with some lawyers to put her affairs in order. She did not like leaving things to chance. She said she wanted to make sure that when she died, the estate would be protected. She did not say she did not trust me. She said she wanted to shield me from pressure. She had seen it before in other families. Younger partners, quick marriages, people who loved the idea of an old house and old money more than the actual person. She told me she hoped Sophie was not like that, but she said she believed in planning, not hope. I remember feeling a little hurt at the time. I told her she did not have to worry. I said I trusted Sophie. Helen answered that trust was good, but clear documents were better. She said she would send me the number of a lawyer she liked, just in case I ever needed help. I said I doubted I would, but I thanked her. I found that old memory now by looking at the photo on my wall. Back then, I thought she was being dramatic. Now her words sounded very plain and very true. After work that day, I did not go home right away. I walked around the block a few times, thinking about how things had started between Sophie and me. We met at one of my firm's sponsor events. It was in a hotel ballroom, all fake gold and mirrors. I was there to speak on a panel about long-term investment. I gave my usual short talk. Stable returns, patient strategy, risk, and reward. I used simple language. People clapped politely. Then they went back to the bar. Sophie was working that event. She was not the main planner yet, just part of the team. I noticed her because she moved quickly, checking details but also smiling at guests. Later that night, she came up to me and said she liked the way I explained boring things. She said I made them sound safe instead of dull. She joked that she needed someone in her life who understood money so she could focus on beauty and experiences. She said it in a light way. At the time, I took it as charm, not as a warning. We started seeing each other after that. She liked that I was calm. She said I made her feel anchored. She said her world was full of fake people and chaos, and she liked how I sat still in the middle of it. I liked her energy. I liked how she could walk into a room and light it up. I liked that she thought my quiet mind was special. We moved fast, maybe too fast. Within 2 years, we were talking about marriage. When I told Helen, she congratulated me, but I could hear something careful in her voice. She invited Sophie to the estate for a weekend so they could know each other better. The estate is on a hill outside the city, about an hour's drive. Old stone, dark wood, tall trees around it. When you stand at the top of the garden, you can see the valley spread out like a painting. I grew up spending summers there. For me, it feels like a piece of my own body. When we arrived that weekend, Sophie was excited. She took photos of everything, the gate, the staircase, the view, even the old clock in the hall. She kept saying that it felt like a movie set. Helen watched her with those sharp eyes. That first evening, we all had dinner in the formal dining room. After dessert, Helen asked Sophie gentle questions. She asked about her work, her family, her plans. Sophie talked about building her own event company one day, not just working for other people. She said she wanted to work with high-end clients. She mentioned how much she loved travel, designer clothes, special experiences. Helen nodded. She said having dreams was good. Later that night, after Sophie went to bed, Helen asked me to walk with her in the garden. The air was cold and the sky was clear. She walked slowly, holding my arm. She said Sophie was charming. She said she could see why I loved her. Then she said something else. She said that charm and hunger can look very close when people are young. She said she hoped I would keep my eyes open. She told me she had started the process of putting the estate into a trust that would pass to me and then to any children I might have. She said the trust would have strict rules. She told me she wanted to keep the house safe from careless hands and from people who saw it only as a pile of bricks with a price tag. I told her I trusted her judgment. I said I did not need to know the details. She laughed softly and said that was exactly why she needed to plan for me. She said one day I might be in a situation where people around me would talk about what they deserved from this place. She wanted the answer to be already written, so I would not have to explain it. Not long after that, when Sophie and I got engaged, Helen asked us to sign some paperwork before the wedding. She talked about it in a blunt and practical way. She reminded us that I had inherited money from my parents and would one day hold the estate. She said the documents would keep things clear if anything ever went wrong. Sophie did not like the idea at first. She said it made her feel like I did not trust her. Helen answered that it was about family history, not about Sophie's value. She even said she would help pay for the wedding if Sophie agreed. I remember that we argued about it, Sophie and I. She said most people did not sign things like that. She said it ruined the romance. She said I was listening to old fears. In the end, she agreed because I promised her it was just a formality, and that I believed we would never need to use those clauses. I believed that at the time. We went to a small office, met with a lawyer Helen knew, and signed a stack of papers. I signed them like I signed contracts at work, focused on the idea, not every line. Sophie signed fast, upside down almost, without reading much. Then we went out for drinks. That is how we started our marriage, with serious documents first, then celebration. In the early years, things were good. We lived in a smaller apartment. We saved money. I worked long hours to build my career. Sophie slowly moved up in her event company. I paid for her courses, her travel, her new business clothes. I was proud when she did well. Then my parents died, both within a few years. I inherited more than I expected. Helen sold some old land and moved more assets into my name. My status at the firm grew. We bought the townhouse. Sophie's eyes started to follow different things after that. She paid more attention to labels, to restaurants, to the kind of people who accepted her once she had the right bag on her arm. At family gatherings, especially with her side, the jokes about money started to get sharper. They would tease that she had done well for herself. They would say she was set for life. At first, it was light. Then it turned into something else. I remember one afternoon in particular, not long before the rooftop dinner. We were at Tara's house for a backyard barbecue. Kids were running around, music was playing, the grill smoked in the corner. The men gathered near the grill, talking about sports and houses. The women sat at a table with drinks, talking about vacations and gossip. Sophie sat with them, looking perfect as always. I floated between the groups, carrying plates, refilling drinks. At one point, I heard Tara say that Sophie should start planning for her mansion years. She meant the time when we would move into the estate full-time. Sophie laughed and said she could already see herself there, hosting big parties, posting photos that would make people jealous. One of the men joked that with my age and stress level, Sophie would be a rich widow before 40. They all laughed. Another said she did not need to wait for that divorce worked faster these days. That got an even bigger laugh. I waited for Sophie to push back, just a little. I waited for her to say it was not funny. She did not. She said something about having options. She said she was not the type of woman to end up with nothing. When she said that, she looked straight at me, not in warmth, but in warning. Later, I was in the kitchen helping Tara stack plates. The house was quiet for a moment. On the wall by the fridge, there was a big paper calendar. Birthdays marked in different colors, school events, a vacation week. One date was circled in bright red. Under it, in clear handwriting, were the words, "Meeting Lawyer." Next to it, in smaller letters, was Sophie's name. I stared at it longer than I should have. Tara noticed. She said it was nothing big, just some planning. She smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. She changed the subject quickly. I walked back out to the yard, hearing my own heartbeat in my ears. I saw Sophie laughing with her friends, head thrown back, drink in hand. I looked at her and thought about Helen's voice in the cold garden, saying that one day people might tell me what they thought they deserved from the estate. At that moment, for the first time, I started to believe that day had arrived. The night at Tara's house stayed in my head like a bad song. I went through my days, but pieces of it kept floating up. The red circle on the calendar, the meeting lawyer note with Sophie's name, the way she had looked at me when she said she would not end up with nothing. I wanted to believe it was nothing. People see lawyers for many reasons. Wills, contracts, work things. I told myself I was overreacting, but the weight in my chest did not move. A week later, Sophie had a late training session with Drew. She said they planned a group outing after, just some drinks with people from the gym. She told me I did not need to come, but she added that I could stop by if I wanted to join for a bit. Her voice made it sound like a polite formality. I finished work and started to go home. Instead, my hands turned the wheel toward the gym. I told myself I just wanted to see for myself that everything was fine, That is how we lie to ourselves. We wrap fear in simple words. The bar they liked was around the corner from the gym. It was one of those trendy places with dark walls, strong music, and low lights. From the outside, it looked like a glowing box. Through the glass, I could see people standing, laughing, holding bright drinks. I went inside and stayed close to the wall near the back. No one paid attention to me. Sophie and Drew were at a table with a small group. They did not see me. They were turned toward each other, faces close like they shared a secret. I could hear them clearly. The music was there, but their voices cut through it. They were talking about clients first, about workout schedules and event dates. Then the topic moved, like it always does, toward money and relationships. One of Drew's friends started telling a story about someone he knew who had married an older rich man, then divorced him and walked away with a house and a big settlement. He called it a smart retirement plan. People at the table laughed. Drew made some comment about how some men never read their own contracts. He said he did not feel sorry for them. He said if you bring money into a relationship and do not protect it, you cannot cry later. He used an example of old finance guys who live in their heads and ignore everything else. I knew who he meant. Then the friend asked Sophie what her plan was if her marriage ever went wrong. He said it in a joking tone, but he was watching her closely, like he wanted a serious answer. She did not look unsure, not even for a second. She told him she was not stupid, and that she had already made it clear she would not leave a marriage poor. She said her husband had a big portfolio and an estate in the country worth about $15 million. I heard her name the number again. She told them she had done her homework, that the law was on her side, and that she would get half if she decided she needed a change. Someone asked if I knew how lucky I was. They laughed at the idea that I thought I was in control. Sophie said she let me feel in control because it made life easier. She said when the time came, she would do what she had to do. The words did not come as a surprise after all the hints, but hearing them in her own voice, calm and proud, still hit me hard. It was like standing under cold water. There was no more room for excuses. Then Drew leaned back in his chair and said that divorcing a rich, soft guy was the closest thing to winning the lottery without buying a ticket. He spoke casually, but he said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. He said a man like that would be too shocked and passive to fight back. He even joked that the man would probably sign anything just to avoid conflict. They all laughed. Sophie laughed too. No one at that table suggested there was anything cruel about this. It was just strategy to them. A game. I stood up and left before anyone saw me. My legs felt stiff, but my head was strangely clear. I did not make a scene. I did not go to the table. There was nothing useful to say. Their words had already told me everything I needed to know. Outside, the air was cold. The city lights were bright. I could not go home, so I walked to a coffee shop a few blocks away. It was half empty that time of night. Warm light, the smell of beans and sugar, soft music. I ordered a coffee and sat at a small table near the window. I must have looked worse than I thought, because a few minutes later I heard someone say my name. I looked up and saw Julia, my colleague from the firm. She held a paper cup and a laptop bag. She said she had been working late nearby. She asked if everything was okay. I did not tell her the full story. I just said that things at home were not good, and that I had just heard some harsh truths. She listened, quiet. That is something I always liked about her. She knows how to listen without filling the silence. I told her, in simple terms, that Sophie seemed more interested in my assets than in me, and that people around her treated me like an easy target. I said they thought I was too soft to defend myself. I said, maybe they were right. Julia shook her head. She reminded me of what I do all day. She said I am the person clients call when they are about to lose everything. She said I am the one who finds a way through complex contracts and market chaos. She said the quiet person at the table is often the one holding the real power, not the one making the loudest jokes. Her words did not fix anything, but they did something important. They reminded me that I was not helpless. I had just acted that way at home for a long time, out of love, out of habit, out of fear of being alone. On my way back to the car, I took my phone out. The screen lit up my hand. I scrolled through my contacts and found Victor's name. My thumb hovered over it. I did not call then, but I did not look away from it either. I knew that soon I would have to. That weekend, I drove out to the estate alone. Sophie said she had too much work to join me. She said she had back-to-back events and needed to stay in the city. Her voice was flat when she said it. I did not push. The drive out of the city is one I could make with my eyes closed, past the concrete and glass, into low brick buildings, then fields and trees. As I drove, I thought about all the summers I had spent there as a boy, running through the garden, listening to Helen's stories, feeling safe. When I reached the gate, Rosa was already outside, holding a broom. She is small and strong, with tired eyes that brighten when she sees people she loves. She worked for my grandparents long before I was born. To me, she always felt like part of the house itself. She smiled when she saw me. She said she was glad I had come. Her voice was warm, but she looked at my face and her smile faded a little. She asked if I was all right. I told her I just needed some time at the house. She nodded, like she understood more than I said. Inside, the estate was the same as always. The same smell of old wood and lemon oil. The same quiet halls. The same heavy portraits on the walls. Helen was gone, but her presence sat in every room. Rosa made tea in the kitchen while I walked through the house. I ran my hand over the rails of the stairs, over the backs of chairs. I sat for a long time in the library, looking at the big windows and the dust floating in the light. Later, in the afternoon, Rosa joined me in the library. She said she had been thinking about something for a while and wanted to tell me. She said she hoped I would not be offended. I told her she could always speak freely with me. She reminded me of a visit from years ago when Sophie and I had come together. She said that during that visit, she had seen Sophie walking around the house alone, taking photos and making notes on her phone. At first, Rosa thought it was just excitement. She said many people did that. But then, one day, Rosa overheard Sophie asking Helen specific questions about who would own what when Helen died. She asked if the house would be in both of our names, if she would be able to sell it one day if she wanted to. She asked if there were other properties in the family. Rosa said that Helen had listened quietly. Then Helen had answered in her usual clear voice. She told Sophie that the house would always stay in the Ellis bloodline. She said spouses who respected that were welcome here, but the paper title would not be in their hands. Rosa said Sophie's face changed for a moment when she heard that. The smile slipped. Then she put it back on. Hearing this now, I felt a strange mix of pain and relief. Pain, because it showed how long Sophie's eyes had been on the house. Relief, because it reminded me that Helen had seen this possibility long before I did and had not left me completely exposed. When Rosa finished, she touched my arm and said she was sorry if this hurt me. She said she had kept quiet while Helen was alive, but now she felt I needed to know. I thanked her. I told her she had done the right thing. After she left me alone, I went to Helen's old study. It was at the end of a hallway, behind a heavy door. This was the room where she had made her choices, the room where she had spoken to lawyers, the room where she had called me late at night to talk about responsibility. The study smelled like paper and ink. The desk was large and dark, with little marks and scratches from years of use. On one side was a familiar drawer with a key in it. I had not opened that drawer since Helen died. I turned the key and pulled the drawer open. Inside, everything was arranged neatly, like she had just left. There were binders with labels I did not fully read. There were a few thick envelopes. On top of them all was a small stack of old business cards, held together by a rubber band that had dried out and cracked. I picked up the cards. The top one had Victor's name on it. Under his printed title, someone had written 2 words in blue ink, Trust Counsel. The handwriting was Helen's. I knew it as well as my own. I stood there for a long time, holding that card. I thought about how she had warned me. I thought about how I had smiled and promised her I would be careful, then gone back to work and love and easy habits. I thought about Sophie in that bar, talking about my life as if it were already divided into pieces for her to collect. I did not feel rage. I felt something sharper and colder. A line, very clear, appeared in my mind. On one side was the man who let people talk over him, who turned conflict into silence. On the other side was the man who understood documents, timelines, and consequences. I knew which side I had to stand on now. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound was loud in the quiet study. I took it out and looked at the screen. There was a missed call from a number I did not know. Right below it, a new voice message notification appeared. The text preview on the screen showed the first few words of the message. It said it was from a family law office. The words after that made it clear they wanted to talk about my wife's recent inquiry. I stared at the screen, then at Victor's card in my hand, and I understood that Sophie had already made her move. The only question left was how I would answer it. Driving back from the estate that day, I felt like I had stepped from one world into another. In one world, I had been the man who believed people when they said they loved him, even while they joked about his money. In the other world, I was a man who finally listened to what people actually did, not what they said. When I got home to the townhouse, Sophie was not there. The rooms felt staged, not lived in. Cushions in perfect order, candles lined up, no real warmth. I picked up my phone and opened the voicemail from the unknown number. A calm woman's voice said she worked at a family law office. She said she was calling to follow up on my wife's recent visit and to offer a consultation if I had any questions about the process. She used words like division of marital property and entitlements. She spoke as if it was already decided that we were ending our marriage and just needed to settle numbers. I did not call her back. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Victor's name. My thumb rested on it for a long moment. Then I pressed it. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded the same as it had in college, just older and calmer. I told him I needed to talk about something serious and that it involved my marriage and the estate. I did not go into details over the phone. He did not push. He simply said we could meet the next afternoon in his office and that I should bring anything I thought might matter. Old paperwork, notes, and my memory. His office was in a mid-rise building across town. No marble floors or gold logos, just clean halls and quiet doors. When I walked into the waiting room, the receptionist smiled and said my name like she had heard it many times from Victor already. She brought me into a small conference room with a long table and plain chairs. Victor came in a minute later with a folder under his arm. He looked almost the same as in college. Lean, sharp eyes, no wasted movement. We shook hands and sat down. He said it was good to see me, but he also said he wished it were under easier circumstances. I started from the beginning. Not from the rooftop dinner, but from before that. I told him about Helen, about how she had worked with him and others to build her trusts. I told him about the papers she had to sign before the wedding, and about how I had not paid much attention to the details because I trusted her. I told him about Sophie's jokes, her family's comments, the visit to the estate, the red circle on Tara's calendar. Then I told him about the rooftop dinner, the way Sophie talked about taking half and her future mansion. I told him about the stranger who said he felt sorry for the old guy at our table. My voice stayed steady, but I watched Victor's face while I spoke. He did not laugh. He did not look surprised. He just listened carefully, nodding now and then. When I finished that part, I told him about the bar near the gym, about standing in the shadows and listening to my wife explain how she would use the law to get half of my assets, about Drew and his lottery comment, about the voicemail from the family law office. Each piece felt like a stone dropping on the table between us. When I stopped, the room was quiet. Victor leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He said he was sorry, and I believed him. Then he asked me a simple question. What did I want? He explained that there were many paths. I could try to talk to Sophie and hope she would agree to something fair. I could try to delay and avoid. Or I could accept that she had already chosen a battlefield and prepare myself to meet her there in a way she did not expect. I looked at the table for a long time. Then I told him I did not want to hurt her just to hurt her. I said I was not looking for revenge. I said I wanted two things: protection for the estate my grandmother trusted me with, and protection for myself. I said I did not want to be forced to pay for someone else's greed and lies for the rest of my life. Victor nodded. He said those were reasonable goals. Then he began to ask practical questions. He asked if I still had any copies of the paperwork I signed with Helen before the wedding. He asked about wills, deeds, account titles. He asked whose names were on which assets, and when each thing had been acquired. He asked if I had access to statements from our joint accounts and credit cards. He asked if I had any proof of Sophie's spending patterns or travel that did not match what she told me. I realized how much I did not know, not because the information was hidden, but because I had never needed to look. In my mind, we had been a team. I earned, she spent, and I assumed there was basic honesty between us. Now I saw how dangerous that assumption was. Victor said that before he gave me any formal advice, he wanted me to gather data. He told me, in simple terms, the truth in these situations comes from paper and records, not from speeches. He told me to go through every account I could legally access, every shared login, every old email that might matter. He told me to copy, not alter. He told me to put everything in order by date. He also told me something else. He reminded me that Helen had been very clear about her intentions. He said he could not discuss the details of her structures in that meeting without the right files, but he said he believed she had not left the estate easy to grab. Hearing that gave me a small, steady anchor inside. When I left his office, I did not feel lighter, but I felt directed. I had a task. That night, instead of going back to the townhouse, I went to a short-term apartment I had already rented for space after one of our last big arguments. The place was small, with blank walls and basic furniture. It felt more honest than the townhouse. I sat at the cheap kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started to work. I logged into our joint bank accounts. I downloaded statements from the past 2 years. I did the same for the credit cards. I looked at each month, each line. At first, it was just numbers, store names, dates, amounts. Then patterns started to appear. Our charges in parts of the city. Sophie had no reason to be in for work. Hotel bars, luxury hotels, spa services, stores near Drew's gym, charges in other cities on dates that matched my business trips when she had told me she was staying home. My heart beat faster as I scrolled, but my hands stayed steady. I opened a spreadsheet and began to log everything that felt off: date, place, amount, any note. I did not try to guess the full story yet. I just collected the pieces. I also logged into our shared cloud account. This was something we used to back up photos and messages. It was automatic, and I had almost forgotten about it. As I clicked through, I found text message backups I had never read. Most were harmless. Then I saw threads with Tara and with Drew. I did not open everything. I did not want to torture myself, but I looked at enough to see the pattern. Jokes about bleeding me dry, comments about my age, plans for trips that did not match what Sophie had told me, lines about getting what she deserved when she was done. I saved those threads into a folder on my computer. I did not change them. I did not reply. I simply pulled them out of the dark and put them where I could see them clearly. Over the next week, I lived a double life. At the firm, I was the same calm advisor. I spoke to clients, attended meetings, moved money responsibly. No one knew what was happening in my private exhale between those tasks. In the evenings, at the apartment, I became my own analyst. I printed statements and messages. I laid them out on the small table and then on the wall using sticky notes and tape. Each note had a date and a place. Slowly, a map formed. Trips, spending spikes, sudden changes in how much she moved through my accounts. I did not cover every inch of the wall. I only needed enough to see the shape of things. Once that shape was clear, I knew I was not crazy, not overreacting, not being dramatic. I was looking at proof. During this time, Sophie and I still messaged, but it changed. Before, I wrote long texts trying to explain my feelings. Now I kept my answers short and neutral. When she sent angry messages about me being cold and unavailable, I replied that I was busy with work and that we would discuss practical matters soon. Then one afternoon, an email from a law firm arrived in my personal inbox. The subject line said it was a formal notice that Sophie had retained them and that they wished to open a respectful and efficient dialogue about separation and asset division. The tone of the letter was polite, but the content assumed many things: that our assets were all joint, that our marriage would be seen as a partnership of equal financial contribution, that her lifestyle was something the court would preserve. They suggested we could avoid conflict if I agreed quickly to certain broad terms. They did not list exact numbers yet, but the message was clear. The letter sounded like someone who thought they already knew the ending and just needed my signature to make it official. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Victor with a short message saying I wanted to schedule another meeting as soon as possible. He replied within the hour, telling me to come in the next day and to bring the records I had gathered. At the second meeting, I walked into his conference room carrying a thick folder and a small USB drive. I laid them on the table between us. He raised his eyebrows slightly, impressed by the amount of material, and then started to go through it. I watched his face as he scanned statements and printouts. Now and then, he underlined a date or circled a charge. He plugged in the USB drive and clicked through the screenshots of messages. He did not react with shock or disgust. He had seen this kind of selfishness before, in other couples. What he looked for was structure, patterns, timelines, useful facts. He told me that what I had collected would matter. He explained that courts do not care much about hurt feelings, but they care about behavior, honesty, and numbers. He said that by logging everything calmly, I had done myself a big favor. He said this was the Mark he remembered from college, the one who could break a complex problem into pieces and deal with each one. We talked about the other letter, the one from Sophie's lawyers. Victor said their assumptions were normal. He said many firms open like that, pushing for as much as possible in hopes of getting it. He told me not to react emotionally to their tone. He said we would answer with facts. I asked again about Helen's work with him. I did not ask for details. I just wanted to know if he believed she had truly protected the estate. He nodded and said that from what he remembered and from what he had seen in other families, she had been thorough. He said the exact terms would appear when needed, and that I should trust the systems she set in motion. Before I left, Victor asked me one more time what I wanted from the process. My answer was clearer now. I told him I wanted legal clarity. I wanted to walk into whatever hearing came next knowing exactly where I stood. I said I was done arguing in kitchens and at parties. If Sophie wanted to treat our lives like a business deal, then we would finish it in the places where business deals are decided. He agreed. He said the next steps would involve formal replies, financial disclosures, and eventually a court date. He told me the timeline would not be instant, but it was already moving. He asked me to keep any new letters or messages and send them to him at once. The weeks that followed felt like living underwater. On the surface, nothing much changed. I went to work. I answered polite small talk. Sophie posted photos online of events and dinners that I was not part of. Her captions used words like new beginnings and freedom. People liked and commented, saying she deserved happiness. None of them knew the full cost she planned to charge for that happiness. Privately, the current moved forward. Victor filed his own letters. Sophie's lawyers sent more. Each time, I read them once, then forwarded them. I did not engage. I was done playing the role of the confused husband. One evening, alone in my apartment, I stood in front of the wall covered in notes and papers. I took a pen and drew a simple line under the last date I had marked. It was the day the first formal notice about property settlement arrived. I told myself that everything before that line was the time when I let things happen to me. Everything after it would be the time when I acted on purpose. Then I sat down at my small desk and opened my laptop. In my inbox sat a new email from Victor's office. The subject was short and clear. It said there was now a scheduled date for the final property settlement hearing. The message included an attachment with the official notice. I downloaded it and saw the date marked in bold near the top. I did not open the document further. I did not need to read the legal language yet. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and felt the world shift one small click forward. The process Sophie had joked about for months was no longer just talk over drinks. It had a real day, a real time, and a real room attached to it. And I understood that when we walked into that room, I would not be the surprised, soft man her friends laughed about. I would be the one who knew exactly what was on the table. The weeks before the hearing felt strange. Time moved fast and slow at the same time. Every day looked normal from the outside, but inside, everything was lining up toward one date on a calendar. Victor sent me updates by email. He kept his messages short. He wrote that he had filed our responses. He said he had received more demands from Sophie's lawyers. He said the court had confirmed the time and place for the final property settlement hearing. I learned to read legal letters the way I read market reports. Not as drama, but as information. Sophie's lawyers kept describing my assets as marital property. They kept using phrases like equitable division and maintaining clients' standard of living. They talked about the townhouse, my investment accounts, and inherited assets, as if they were all the same. Victor's replies were calm and firm. He never used harsh words. He simply wrote that certain things were separate property, that certain items were held in structures that must be respected, and that we disputed many of their claims. He did not explain every detail to me right away. He said there were some things it was better for me to hear once, in person, not over email. One Friday afternoon, I went to his office again. The same simple conference room, the same long table. This time, there was a neat stack of papers already laid out on his side, held together with clips. My name was on the top page. He explained that we were close to the hearing now. He said the court liked clear information. He told me he had prepared all the necessary forms and summaries. He asked me to check that all numbers were correct. Income, accounts, debts, assets acquired before marriage, assets acquired after. We went through the list slowly. There was nothing I did not recognize. It was my own life turned into lines on a page. Salary, bonus, investments, the townhouse, the car, the estate, listed not as mine in a simple way, but under the name of a trust I had seen on letterheads as a child. I did not need to understand every legal term. I only needed to know that Victor did. When I asked about something, he answered in calm, plain language. He told me which parts were fully safe, which parts might still be discussed, and which parts were already locked in place by existing agreements. He reminded me of the prenup I had signed before the wedding. I had not thought about that paper for years. It had sat in a file somewhere in a cabinet I never opened. Now it stood between Sophie and things she thought were hers. I remembered the day we signed it. A small office, a lawyer with kind eyes, Helen sitting straight in her chair. Sophie had looked annoyed, then bored, then eager to be done so we could go out and celebrate. I had thought of that day as a minor obstacle before a happy life. Now I understood it was a shield my grandmother had built for a war I did not know I would fight. Victor told me we would take certain key documents to the hearing. He said the judge would need to see them. He did not hand them to me yet. He just tapped the stack in front of him and told me to trust that everything was ready. At the end of the meeting, he gave me a simple instruction. He said that during the hearing, I should speak as little as possible. He told me to answer the judge's questions clearly and honestly, but not to argue with Sophie or her lawyer. He said our real voice would be the papers, not my anger. On the way out of the building, I stopped in the lobby and sat on a bench for a minute. People passed by me, looking at their phones, carrying bags. No one knew that my whole life was being broken down and weighed in rooms like the one upstairs. It felt strange and private and very public at the same time. At home, or what used to be home, things were cold. Sophie had changed the way she spoke to me. She did not send messages about feelings anymore. Now it was about schedules and money. She asked when I would finish moving my things out of the townhouse. She asked when we would talk about temporary support. She called me selfish when I did not respond right away. I went back to the townhouse one last time to pack the rest of my personal items. The rooms looked less like ours and more like hers now. Some of my books were gone from the shelves. New photos sat in frames, mostly of her at events, her with friends, her in front of pretty backdrops. I barely appeared in any of them. In the bedroom, my side of the closet was almost empty. I took the last of my shirts and put them in a box. On the nightstand, there was a photo I had not seen in a long time. It was from the first year of our marriage, at the estate. Helen stood in the middle, with me on one side and Sophie on the other. We were all smiling. Back then, I thought we were building something together. I held the frame for a moment, then put it face down in the box. I did not throw it away. I just did not want to look at it right then. In the living room, I saw an open notebook on the coffee table. It was Sophie's. There was a list on the page. Some of it was about work. Client pitch, venue check, photo shoot. But there was another section titled After Settlement. Under it, she had written things like renovate townhouse, trip to Europe, new car, maybe buy small place near estate if possible. She had written these lines in a casual hand, like planning a vacation, not planning a life off the back of someone she thought was too weak to refuse. I closed the notebook and left it where it was. Back at my apartment, I started to live even more simply. I had a bed, a table, a chair, a few boxes. That was enough. I cooked basic meals. I went to work and came home. I spoke to almost no one outside of work and Victor. One night, Julia messaged me and asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work. I said yes. We met at the same little shop where she had found me that night after the bar. She asked how things were going. I told her the truth in broad strokes. I said we had a court date now. I said Sophie's lawyers were acting like they had already won. I said part of me still felt strange about letting a judge and some papers decide what my marriage had been worth. But another part of me was relieved, because at least it would not be decided by jokes at bars and whispers at parties. Julia listened. She told me again that I was not powerless. She said she knew me at work, and she had seen what happened when I focused on a problem. She said she did not doubt I would be prepared. Before we left, she squeezed my shoulder and told me to remember that loud people are often very quiet when real boundaries appear. The day before the hearing, I took time off from the firm. My boss did not ask many questions. He just said to take care of myself. He trusted me. That trust felt like a weight and a gift. I spent that day in the apartment, going through a small checklist Victor had sent me. It was very simple. Rest, eat, review basic facts, and put together any personal items I might need during the hearing. He also suggested I bring a notepad if I wanted to write anything down, but he said I probably would not need it. I ironed my best suit. It was navy, not flashy. The same one I wore for big client presentations and funerals. It fit well, but I saw more lines in my face in the bathroom mirror than I remembered. I did not see weakness there, though. I saw a tired man who had finally stopped lying to himself. In the evening, Victor called me. It was a short call. He said everything was ready on his end. He said he would meet me outside the courtroom the next morning. He reminded me again to stay calm, answer only what was asked, and let him handle the rest. After we hung up, I sat at the table with a plain manila envelope in front of me. It was empty. I looked at it for a moment, then placed it gently into my briefcase. The documents that would go inside it were still with Victor, but I already felt their weight in my mind. Years of planning by Helen, months of work by Victor, and hours of quiet sorting by me. I slept surprisingly well that night. No bad dreams. I woke before the alarm. The sky outside was still gray. I showered, shaved, and dressed. Suit, shirt, tie, clean shoes. I ate a simple breakfast and forced myself to drink water. My hands were steady when I locked the apartment door behind me. The courthouse was in the center of the city, a large stone building with wide steps and tall columns. People moved in and out steadily. Lawyers in suits, couples holding folders, families who looked anxious. I had probably walked past it 100 times in my life without thinking about what was happening inside. Now it was the place where my marriage would be dissected and decided. I met Victor on the steps. He wore a dark suit and carried a slim leather folder. We shook hands. He looked me in the eye and asked if I was ready. I said yes. It was the truth. Inside, the courthouse smelled like paper and cleaning chemicals. The floors were polished, the halls wide but crowded. We went through a security check, then took an elevator up to the family court level. The hallway there was quieter, but the air felt heavier. We stood in the lobby outside the courtroom for a few minutes. There were bench seats along the walls. Some were occupied by people whispering, some by people staring straight ahead. Victor checked his watch and then his folder. A few minutes later, Sophie arrived with her lawyer, Tara, and Drew. They came in a small group, talking in low voices. Sophie wore a pale suit and high heels. Her hair was perfect. To someone who did not know her, she might have looked nervous. To me, she looked excited. She had the expression she used before a big event, when she knew cameras would be on her. Her lawyer, a tall man with careful hair, saw us and walked over. He greeted Victor with smooth politeness, then nodded at me like I was just another file in his day. He made a small comment about hoping we could resolve everything efficiently today so everyone could move on. His tone suggested he already knew who would be moving on richer. He also said, in an easy voice, that after the hearing, Sophie would finally have the security she deserved from half of everything, including the old estate. He said the name of the estate like it was a hotel. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked past me like the matter was settled. I glanced at Sophie. She did not correct him. She smiled a little, like she was already picturing her next step. Tara stood behind her with crossed arms, eyes tight. Drew hung back, hands in his pockets, but his chest was puffed out, like he had something to do with any of this. I did not answer the lawyer. Victor did. He said in a mild tone that we were sure the court would bring clarity today. Then he turned back to me and quietly asked for my briefcase. I handed it to him. He opened it, slipped a thick, sealed envelope inside, and closed it again. Then he gave it back to me. "Remember," he said softly, "we let the document speak." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and saw a message from Julia. It was short. "You've got this. Numbers don't lie." I put the phone away. My heart rate slowed a little. A minute later, a court officer opened the heavy wooden door and called our case name into the lobby. The sound was sharp in the quiet hall. Victor nodded toward the door. I took the briefcase handle in my hand, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. Then I stepped forward, toward the room where my wife planned to laugh about taking half my life, and where she would finally learn that not everything she thought was hers could be touched. Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, pale walls, one big seal above the judge's seat. The air was still. When we took our places, I sat at one table with Victor. Sophie sat at the other with her lawyer. Tara and Drew were behind her, ready to watch the show. The clerk called the case. Judge Alvarez came in, serious and calm. We all stood, then sat. Sophie's lawyer spoke first. He told the judge that Sophie had been a devoted wife, that she had given up chances in her career, and that she needed half of everything to maintain her life. He said this included my salary, my investments, and my grandmother's estate, which he described as worth around $15 million. Sophie laughed softly when he said that part. The sound carried in the quiet room. She looked at me like she had finally reached the moment she had planned for. When it was our turn, Victor stood. He said we had prepared a clear set of documents for the court. He asked if I could hand them up. The judge nodded. I picked up the envelope from my briefcase. It felt heavy and light at the same time. I walked to the bench, handed it to the clerk, and told the judge that the dates and ownership records inside would answer the claims made. My voice did not shake. Judge Alvarez opened the envelope. She read the prenup Helen had pushed us to sign, which kept all inherited assets and trust property as my separate property. She read the trust papers showing the estate belonged to an old bloodline structure with Sophie's name nowhere in it. She read the timeline of Sophie's spending and the messages about taking me for everything. Her eyebrows went up. She looked over the pages, then at Sophie, and let out a short laugh she did not completely hide. She said it seemed my wife had made very confident plans about assets she never legally had. In the end, the judge ruled that the estate and most of my investments were protected. Sophie would get a limited settlement based on our actual shared life, not on her wish list. She would also pay a significant part of my legal costs because of her behavior and the evidence. Sophie stared at the table. Her lawyer's face had gone pale. Drew's jaw was tight. No one laughed anymore. Later, in the dim parking garage, I walked alone to my car with my empty envelope folded under my arm. Above me, I could hear distant voices as Sophie argued with her lawyer. My phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I watched it ring, let it go dark, opened my car door, and closed it on the noise.